they announced the quarterback yet? I looked a couple days ago.
SportsBIT.com. I'd like to welcome the SBR Forum pros, the RX Forum members, our social media followers, including the Money Gang. And we have got 2 great days planned for you with leading voices in the industry sharing their tips and experiences. So make sure to take note. And then, of course, later today, we've got the poker tournament with Big Orange, the man to beat. So keep an eye on him. And then, obviously, lastly, I'd like to thank everybody involved in making this happen, including SBR John, because without him, none of this would happen. So everybody enjoy, take notes, and, of course, have fun. Thank you.
All right, guys, welcome to the college football panel, the first panel up today. I want to welcome in the guests here. We got Bill Connelly. Follow him on Twitter at SBN_BillC to my immediate left. In my opinion, the best college football writer in the country. Writes a 130-team preview for SBNation. If you're not reading it, I definitely recommend it. He's also at Football Outsiders. Bill, welcome. What's on your mind?
Just trying to, take some notes here, figure out what people want to hear for writing in the fall, I guess.
Okay. And Bill, not so much of a actionable bettor, however, really controls the market a lot more than I think you even realize.
I'll take your word for that. I'm not gonna say a word about that.
Okay. Well, to his left, we have Bud Elliott at BudElliott3 on Twitter, national recruiting analyst and editor for SBNation. Tomahawk Nation founder, has a law degree, a graduate from Florida State, resides in the state of Florida, knows college football recruiting as good as anybody. Bud, welcome.
Happy to be here. Just want to pick some winners.
All right, well, we'll get after that. We got today's picks and week 1 best bets as well. And arguably the smartest person in the room, Ed Feng. Follow him on Twitter at ThePowerRank, founder of ThePowerRank.com. Using advanced numbers for sports predictions, a degree from Rice University, parlayed that into a PhD from Stanford in applied mathematics. Ed, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Drew, and I'm glad that degree was good for something.
Okay. Well, guys, let's get right into it. Finding change is going to be a key topic for today, tomorrow, kind of get ahead of the market. Want to just come at you, but if you want to start us off, teams changing tempo, so mostly offensive tempo, and looking to kind of get ahead of the market in betting totals.
Sure, so I think this is an opportunity we have early in the season in college football. I'm not really looking at teams which are going to be more or less efficient. I just want to see which teams can we maybe take overs or unders simply because they have more or fewer at-bats. Teams that are going to make a significant change in tempo. I'll start in Tallahassee. Last year, Florida State was a bottom 10 team nationally in Bill's adjusted tempo statistic. They're bringing in Willie Taggart, who the last 3 years has been a top third or top quartile team with his Gulf Coast offense. I'm projecting at least 2 more possessions a game. I think in some games they'll have 3 more possessions. So even if they're not any more efficient on a drive-to-drive basis, that's a chance to score a significant more number of points per game. Additionally, their defense is going to have to face a lot more at-bats. So that's something you can catch on early. That I don't know if teams understand, or if the general public really understands just how much faster teams like that are going to go. We also have an opportunity at Arkansas, going from Brett Bielema's offense, which was kind of plodding, and now Chad Morris coming from Southern Miss. Again, even if they're not any more efficient, can you be ahead of the market simply by knowing how many more plays they're going to get per game, how many more drives they're going to get per game, and importantly, how many more plays that Arkansas defense is going to have to face per game, because they've not been very good.
Absolutely. Bill?
Yeah, I would agree with Arkansas, especially. I think that they, first of all, I think tempo would have suited them very well last year. Florida State as well. It would have helped them because they have a lot of good receivers, and I think that they'll probably adapt to that system quicker than we would normally assume. Like a run-based system would adapt to a more passing style. But then also their defense was already bad, and the next good defense Chad Morris has will be his first. And so, chances are there will be quite a few shootouts. Even for the SEC, there are going to be quite a few pretty impressive shootouts.
Ed, anything on your mind as far as teams changing tempo?
Yeah, we were talking up here earlier a little bit about Nebraska. Scott Frost going there is another team to look out for. I'm not sure he has the personnel to really be any more efficient this first year, but we'll see what he does in terms of pace.
Okay, and Bud, you bring up Florida State. What about factoring in the offensive coordinator changes as well? Bringing in Walter Bell from Maryland, before that Arkansas State, kind of up-tempo as well. Who do you think will be calling the plays, or actually you would know, and how much do you factor in the offensive coordinator changes?
Sure. So Willie Taggart's still going to be calling the plays in Tallahassee. Walt Bell is going to help him organize. A lot of these teams, when they go chaos tempo, when they're so quick, they usually have their run game coordinator and their pass coordinator up in the box working ahead, right? If this current play works successfully, what are we going to call on first down? Give me a run, give me a pass, give me something I can call. Cool, yes, no, give me an alternative, so they can get these plays called in 6 to 8 seconds. You don't see these head coaches who are calling the plays flipping through the playbook. That just takes too long. So the one real change I think you will see if you followed Taggart's offense at USF and at Oregon was he was really not a big RPO guy. Bell at Arkansas State and then also at Maryland, if you watched that Texas game last year, right. They're very heavily in the RPO game. With DeAndre Francois coming off a knee injury, certainly I don't know how his mobility is going to be, and the RPO is a way that you can help make the defense defend all 11 without running the quarterback excessively. So I think you'll see a little more RPO there with Florida State. Additionally, we have a couple more tempo teams as well. UCLA going from Jim Mora to Chip Kelly.
Absolutely.
Again, are they going to be that much more efficient? I kind of think they will, just I think Chip, at the college level at least, will do a good job pulling more efficiency out of them, but they're definitely going to be a lot quicker. And then on the flip side, A&M. A&M under Sumlin was a up-tempo team. Now you've got a guy that really wants to control the tempo and slow things down and play with more control in Jimbo Fisher. So I would expect A&M to have significantly fewer possessions this season.
And Bud, to come back at you, you mentioned a run play and a pass play. Is that something kind of taking over college football? I know you have a lot of contacts with coaches, offensive coordinators. Is that what every up-tempo team is doing?
Well, I just think that you have to have somebody helping you if you're going to be a tempo play caller, right? Because you don't have time to flip through the playbook, or unless you want to be a Mike Leach type where you just have a card with maybe 10 plays on it. But the RPO stuff really is impacting things. And I think we're seeing, additionally, the teams who can actually play man-to-man defense, legitimately man-to-man defense, because this is everybody says, how do you stop the RPO? It's kind of unstoppable. Well, if the refs allow blockers downfield that actually block linebackers during the play, certainly. But the teams who can just man up and play man-to-man, that's really kind of the answer to the RPO game. So I do wonder if we're going to see a gap between the teams who have the defensive personnel to play legitimate man-to-man defense versus all these teams that play this soft zone, because the spread is just eating these guys alive.
I mean, are people really saying who's going to stop the RPO? I feel like this is like a rehash of who's going to stop this up-tempo offense, these Oregon Ducks, and the answer was, get a dominant defensive line.
Get studs up front and drop 7.
And of course, I believe if you can cover one-on-one in the backfield, that helps a lot. But like Nick Fairley in the championship game. Oh, for sure. Oregon didn't have an answer for him, so there's always ways to stop schemes.
Right, the defensive line also comes in handy when it comes to, the thing to remember about the RPO in general is you have to be willing to run. You're reading the defense, and you might dictate that you run the ball, so if it's, RPOs aren't going to be effective on 3rd and 8, so the disruption that you can manage early in a series of downs, it's going to help a lot too.
Absolutely. And Bill, that brings up, Ed, you bring up the defensive line, being able to cover up the defensive backs if you're weak at that area. Bill, one thing I've noticed with reading your articles is you really highly emphasize the continuity of defensive backfield. And it was one thing that I disagreed with, because I think that defensive line is much more important.
Right.
But take over here.
It's more, defensive line is obviously going to be very important in terms of overall quality, but if we're looking at potential change from year to year, the continuity, basically what I try to do is just go through all the, the percentage yards returning, percentage this and that returning, and see which actually correlated to improvement and regression on offense or defense. And, it basically says that, continuity at running back doesn't mean all that much. Continuity on the lines doesn't mean nearly as much as I would have thought, but continuity at quarterback, obviously. But then receiving core and defensive backfield, those were the 3 that had the most impact on your year-to-year change. So I don't think it says that defensive line isn't important so much as it just says that change in the secondary can make a big impact. And that's something Alabama, top 6 defensive backs are gone. Half the rest of their 2 deep is gone. I think we're making a bunch of assumptions about Alabama, and maybe that's
probably
fair.
Good assumptions. But.
Right, that's probably fair, but we are making a lot of assumptions if we want that, those high win totals that they're projected to have right now.
Bill, the one takeaway I had from your continuity numbers was if you watch television, the announcers always talk about offensive line continuity. They work as a group, all this stuff. And your data shows that's maybe not quite as true as they want to make it. Then that's, I think, something you can exploit. You know, hey, this team's got all their offensive linemen back. Okay, cool. Were they good? If they weren't, who cares?
Yeah, I think in-season continuity ends up mattering more than the offensive line, because you start to look at the teams at the end of the year that had like 9 different guys who started a game or something. They probably struggled a lot. But if you keep that starting 5 that you had in August, then you probably did pretty well.
Yeah, and on my podcast, like my guy pulled out that little segment that Bill, when I had Bill on, he pulled out that little segment about the importance of quarterback, receiver, and defensive backs. And my take on that is just how important passing is.
Right.
You know, in the NFL, we talk, I mean, passing completely dominates, running is pretty insignificant. And that's really not the case in college football. Like the efficiencies in terms of passing and rushing are a lot closer in college football than they are in the NFL. But still, it's good to be able to throw the ball. Right. It's good to be able to have guys that can cover. And that still means a ton in college football, and that's what you see in Bill's numbers.
Yeah, recruiting rankings, I think I've picked up on, too, that defensive back, having good recruits in the defensive backfield tends to matter a little bit more. I think defensive back and defensive line are the 2 most impactful in that regard. You can have lower recruiting rankings on offense, but have a pretty good system and still move the ball. Recruiting rankings as a whole tend to matter more on the defensive side.
Okay, and in your continuity rankings or judging each position, what would you say is the most important? Is quarterback the most important?
Yeah, I mean, I hate giving the boring answer, but I think it is the most important thing still.
And what would be second and third?
I don't remember if it was receiver and defensive back or vice versa, but those 3 definitely stood out.
Receiver
overall.
and defensive back, okay. And what would be maybe the least?
I think it was offensive line, and I think part of that is because it's the only thing we have to measure offensive linemen is starts. You know, we don't get to see the grades the coaches give, so it's a blind spot, so to speak, in terms of stats, I think. But it was that, and I think linebacker were the 2. I mean, I think handicappers have figured that out for a while. It's just the idea that linebackers are easier to replace than anybody else. Or at least there's not as large a range between a great one and a good one or something like that. But yeah, the lines just really don't have that continuity aspect that we think it does.
That's very interesting, because I bet a lot of people would kind of think like I did before this conversation, as far as it would go quarterback and then right to the lines as far as offensive or defensive lines, but your numbers kind of suggest otherwise.
Right, and I mean, and again, maybe that's just because we can't measure the offensive line very well, but it really does. And I mean, even when I'm writing the previews, I'm going to say, you know, they have a good line that returns, 86 career starts or whatever, but it really, in terms of projections, it only matters so much.
Okay. Ed, let's get you more in here. Your preseason regression model, do you want to touch on that a little bit and how that helps you betting college football early on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in college football, we have this really nice thing where programs tend to persist from year to year. Alabama's always going to have financial resources and tradition that Rice will never have, and these teams never switch places. And so we can use that to build models, and I use 4 years, the past 4 years, to project for next year. Bill, I think you use 5? Or
yeah, it's weighted, but yeah, a little
yeah,
bit.
so mine's weighted too by this linear regression method. I look at turnovers because the ratings that I use can be greatly impacted if you're plus 25 in turnovers or minus 30 in turnovers for the turnover margin for the course of the year. And then returning starters, which is obvious. But with those 3 factors, that's how I build a preseason model. So yeah, it's a powerful thing. And the one thing that I've learned from doing this over the past however many years is that it's a regression model. I mean, you expect that teams that had an outlier performance are going to come back to what their true skill level is. And you only have to think back to USC in 2016, had a great 9-game span where they were fantastic when Sam Darnold took over the quarterback position. My model predicted that they would come back pretty strongly last year, and they did. Those types of predictions are much easier to make than to predict a team like Georgia last year, who everyone thought was kind of a borderline top 25 team, not a playoff contender, but made a huge leap with a true freshman quarterback and a defense that took a leap. So the regression model is really good at predicting overrated teams. This is why Bill lets me write an overrated column, 3 overrated teams in SBNation every year. He does not let me write the underrated column because those predictions are just harder to make.
Yeah, no, it's always easier to poke holes in some of the overrated teams than it is figure out who's going to overachieve. It's always been that way.
Do you want to throw out a couple teams that maybe are overrated this year?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on where you look. I'm going to pick on the AP poll because I think one of the top 4 teams is pretty overrated, and that would be Wisconsin. Okay. I actually don't think they'd be in the top 4 if that poll would have come out before the Urban Meyer situation happened this month. But they are 4th a strong program, a lot of respect for that program, but they're playing in probably the most difficult conference this year. I mean, they're not going to be a favorite in the championship game to begin with, and if you don't win that game, you kind of can't live up to a top 4 billing. And I think, like, as much respect as I have for their quarterback, I think he has a ceiling, and I think they're overrated at 4th.
And would you all agree with him saying the Big Ten is the best conference this year, or would you go with the SEC or possibly the ACC?
I think, I mean, you know, using like average ranking or something, I think it's still the SEC. The really interesting thing for me this year is the ACC might not have a bad team. They might only have one title contender, but unless North Carolina just bombs, and I mean, which is possible, but they do have still a decent amount of talent that's not suspended. But unless they bomb, like everybody else could, you know, is entering the season thinking, you know, we could be a top 40 or 50 caliber team in terms of like a computer rating kind of thing. And so that depth, I mean, we saw the depth in the ACC the last couple of years with Pitt pulling upsets and Syracuse pulling upsets. And I think you could still, the middle class in the ACC is enormous, and that could result in a lot of upsets, I think.
I think if you look at it from a title contender perspective, the Big Ten would have the most, right? The SEC, I think, has a clear 3 with Bama, Georgia, and Auburn. You know, is the Big Ten's 3 as good as them with Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan? Maybe a slight tick down, if anything, but then the Big Ten goes ahead and adds Michigan State and Wisconsin. And I don't think the SEC's 5 matches up quite as well with the SEC or the Big Ten's 5.
Yeah, it all just depends on what we're calling, how we decide to rank conferences. If it's average, maybe it's SEC. If it's just the top 5 or 6, it's almost certainly the Big Ten. Big Ten's averages get dragged down by having Illinois and having and Rutgers typically, and maybe Maryland this year. A lot of bad teams to offset the good ones, so that hurts the averages. But they also have a lot of contenders.
Yeah, and I think you really need to look at those top teams in the division. I just went through and calculated some conference odds, and Clemson's at like 68% to win the ACC.
Right.
And that's reflective of the fact that Miami, I think, is a little bit overrated in the polls, unless Florida State is as good as Bill says they were on my podcast. You know, Clemson is a definitive favorite there. Ohio State might be as good of a team, but their odds to win their conference are just way lower.
Right.
Just going through that Big Ten East schedule, and you know, potentially Wisconsin in the championship game, it's a much different story. And their odds were under 50% to win the conference.
All right, good stuff, guys. Sophie, just to let you know, the clock on time never got ticked, so not 100% sure where we're at. But anyway, Bud, want to get to you with recruiting items with early season betting value. Lead recruiting analyst at SBNation. Anything that pops to your head as far as recruits that can really make an impact in the first month of the college football season?
Sure. So I think we need to start in LA. There's a good chance that USC is going to start a true freshman in JT Daniels. A lot of people didn't know about him because he didn't get a ton of recruiting hype. He actually skipped his senior season to enroll at USC, which a lot of people would understandably want to stay away from the guy. However, he, I believe, was held back earlier, so he is an age-appropriate freshman, so that he has that going for him. He also set like a ton of California records. We had him at the Army All-America Bowl, and he looked like he belonged with the top players in that class, and most people believe the 2018 quarterback class was one of the best they've ever seen, including guys who've been doing this for like 30 years. It's easily the best I've ever seen in a decade, with Justin Fields going to Georgia, Trevor Lawrence going to Clemson, who I believe will eventually win that starting job. Daniels threw 4 touchdowns the other day in their scrimmage. I think that you can get some value even on a name brand program like USC simply because the public is going to think, all right, true freshman, quarterback?
Mm-hmm. That's what I think.
I'm on board. I think the guy's going to play well immediately.
But there's just not a lot of history of true freshmen doing well. You know, a lot of people say Johnny Manziel, but he was actually a redshirt freshman. So the number of true freshmen that do well, it's just not that many.
I think we're starting to see that shift a little bit, at least. I mean, the last 2 years, the national runner-up had a true freshman quarterback with Hurts and then Fromm last year, and they both, you know, especially Fromm last year, he made a lot of third down passes in that national title game. He looked like about a junior by the end of the year. So I think what's interesting when thinking from a betting perspective is, you know, even if he wins the job and USC ends up being kind of undervalued, do they still kind of play it vanilla at the beginning of the year to make sure he gets his feet underneath him, and then eventually he starts to take off? So I'm really curious how that affects their game plan, even if they're really confident in the guy.
Yeah, and I gotta think that I think the odds of having a true freshman perform really well are increasing, just because I think these guys are getting more coaching earlier in their lives.
Yeah.
Am I still thinking about fading true freshman quarterbacks? Yes.
I think in general that's still really good advice. It's also important to understand that not all recruit years are created equal, right? For instance, this year, I don't believe there's a 5-star quarterback out there. I was at Elite 11 and I was pretty underwhelmed. And I think most of the guys that got picked for the Elite 11 this year would not have made it to last year's Elite 11. Last year was a really historic recruiting class. I think we had 4 or 5 5-star rated quarterbacks, and from a physical talent and also mental maturity standpoint, I think they all really deserved to be there, especially the 3 with Lawrence at Clemson, Fields at Georgia, and Daniels at USC. I also think it's important to pay attention to the kids who were very highly rated but didn't make a year 1 impact. Some kids are rated highly simply because they have a great ceiling. Other kids are rated highly because maybe their ceiling's not quite as great, but the floor is excellent. They're ready to make an impact on day 1. And not to be all USC here, but Jay Tufele was a 5-star D tackle that USC signed last year. I believe he redshirted. He's been ripping it up at practice out there. So it is important, okay, look at who the team lost, but you got to also look at who they brought in, not in the most recent class, because for the most part, like Ed and Bill said, the true freshmen are not going to make an impact. But your second-year guys, especially if they're very talented, even if they're year 1 starters, definitely can.
I think Hurts, especially, was a guy who really helped from a floor perspective, especially his freshman year, where he didn't make mistakes. He took the safe path most of the time. And when you have that, and you've got Alabama's defense and everything else, that's going to work out a lot of the time. It's just you get to the national title game and you're down 13 at halftime, and you have to make plays. Then he went with the playmaker instead of the high ceiling instead of the high floor, and it ended up paying off. So that is kind of interesting. Some guys start off ahead but don't advance all that much.
One other thing I kind of wanted to circle back to coaching changes and recruiting. Ohio State, it's been in the news a lot lately, but one thing I want to focus on here, their offense is changing rapidly. They're going with a Ryan Day offense now, which is a lot more like what you're going to see at Oklahoma. Traditionally, Urban Meyer has been a big run-the-quarterback guy. Now they're throwing the ball around a lot more, and I believe that they have a quarterback in Dwayne Haskins who's more suited for that type of role. If Ohio State ends up going 11-1 or 12-0, and they throw the ball as much as they're telling recruits they're going to throw the ball, which is a lot. I mean, you see how well they're recruiting receivers right now. A lot of that is because the kids are buying into this idea that Ohio State's going to be chucking it around a lot more and running the quarterback less. As a receiver, that's attractive. Haskins is 40-1 offshore some places for the Heisman. If I can get Ohio State's quarterback throwing the ball 30 times a game with the kind of record they can have, especially if I can find it at 50, which was available a couple weeks ago, that's not a bad look.
Being able to shop around. One thing to use SBR odds for is to find the best odds out there. But you bring up the fact that the quarterback, and that's interesting because Tua is only 7-1, right? The quarterback for Alabama. So 50-1 for the quarterback for Ohio State. It seems like value just right there alone.
Yeah, I want nothing to do with 7-1 for the Heisman on anybody. That's
yeah.
If I'm going to put my money away for 4 months, I don't want that kind of return.
Bill, let me get to you with what have you learned over the years, being as good a writer as you are, where teams have overachieved your numbers? Maybe last year's UCF, FAU, Fresno State, Purdue, even, where you've kind of made mistakes and going into this year have maybe revamped your numbers and for bettors to kind of concentrate on where the market might be slow to react.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I mean, it's different for every team, so it's hard to make any massive conclusions, but there are always second-year leaps. We saw it last year with both UCF and Georgia. Sometimes it just takes what I call a year zero kind of situation with schools where, Kirby Smart being a good example, the classic example being, Lou Holtz going 0-11 at South Carolina his first year and then winning 8 games the next 2 years. Sometimes it just takes a year for you to get all the pieces in the right place, and then once they are, then with Georgia, for instance, the fact that they had 5 stars everywhere, they had really nice experience in key positions and all that. The fact that they were then kind of grasping what Kirby Smart was teaching, it allowed them to make a big leap. UCF being the same way, obviously, really grasping. The first year he started Mackenzie Milton as a freshman. The offense was very inefficient and inconsistent, and they were moving very quickly, so that it would backfire even more. But they had a pretty good defense. Last year they had a pretty good defense, and their offense figured everything out and took a huge leap. So it's hard to predict those. I mean, it's always they're always going going to be some duds, but that is something to look to, especially if you can combine it with recruiting output and everything else, that maybe a second year, if they were underwhelming in the first year, you can find value in those teams entering a second year. So that's certainly the other thing on the flip side of the teams that make a big leap. There is kind of the Bill James plexiglass principle. There is that for football too, where if you make a big leap one year, I know as a fan you're immediately thinking, okay, well we're great now, and then we're just going to keep going up every single year, and it doesn't work. Like if you can solidify gains after a big leap, that's a really big thing. You often regress a little bit.
So maybe for Purdue, having a step back.
Yeah, that's going to be, we got kind of conflicting things there because they did take a big leap forward, but Jeff Brom offenses are usually really, really good, and it wasn't last year. So it feels like, the defense is almost certainly going to step back because they lose a lot of guys and they probably improve too much. Offense might be really good, and so maybe if you're Purdue, then you're just hoping those two things offset each other, and you can still play at a kind of a top 40 level.
Okay. And Ed, to piggyback off that, I know you're a big Scott Frost fan, bringing UCF to 0-12 to 12-0. I've heard you mention on, I believe, your own podcast, as far as anything he touches turns to gold. Are you that big of a fan of him, or even this year?
That was Bill's line.
Okay.
And I kind of laughed at it. I kind of snickered at it before last year. And then you, actually, Drew Martin, I got to point out, you were all over UCF all last year, and you were right. And, it was one of those crazy things. I think they were bottom 10 in my adjusted yards per play 2 years ago, and they moved up to top 10 last year. And no math model is going to predict that.
No.
Okay.
I mean, just none. So, yeah, everything Scott Frost touches the gold. That's a Bill Connelly line.
Okay.
You don't remember writing that?
It turns
Wait,
to
so
red.
I remember
turns to
writing that,
red.
you
It turns
don't.
to red.
See, this is what happens when you write 130 previews.
I know. I
every
say a lot of words, and then no. But he is, like, for a small sample, it's really hard to poke a hole into what he's done so far. I guess we don't know how he maintains a program because he's only been a head coach for 2 years. But with the background with Tom Osborne and Bill Walsh and Chip Kelly and all the guys he's learned from, and then you combine that with the fact that he, in his first year, got UCF back to where it should be at least, and then in his second year did what he did. The next time he screws up is the first time, so we'll see how long he can ride that.
I think it's kind of hard to judge just because he walked into that, but I don't think UCF was really an 0-12 team.
No.
So they kind of got a boost.
Yeah, that was a top at least 40 to 60 program, not a number 126 or whatever they were at the end of that last season. So there was definitely an artificial. Anybody was going to come in and give them a bump. The fact that he did it twice was pretty impressive.
My in-laws live in Orlando, so I'm up there a lot. I know a lot of high school coaches in the state, and just the two things that they really talk about with Scott is the incredible buy-in he seems to get from everybody in his program. Like you hear the phrase, we'll run through walls for that guy. That's legit. And then the ability to run the football with power from spread formations while not being predictable is something that they seem to get guys, and that leads to obviously explosive pass plays with the play action game. But it's really impressive.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we got about 10 minutes left. Want to leave some time for questions. Let's get to actionable betting kind of ideas here. Best bets, season over win totals. Bud, I know you mentioned Virginia. You liked them over in the ACC. Is there a team you like more than Virginia this year? More than
Virginia. So I think when you're taking season win totals, it's really important to have your stuff ready right after spring, because these soft numbers come out in May, and I took 15 of them May 18th. After that, there's a lot fewer that I like. And look, you do take a risk that somebody could get hurt, but I mean, think about I posted these on SBNation. Boston College over 5.5 minus $1.10. Now it's minus $1.80 and 6.5. So it's moved 70 cents and a full win. You got to be ready for this stuff in early May, especially if you're somebody who, I mean, look, if you're a whale and you're putting down 10 G's on something, all right, well, you can't get those kind of limits in May. But if you're a $250, $500 bettor, why not hit these soft lines early on? Like, that's the most important takeaway, is have your stuff ready to go. Be ready to fire when these things come out, because there are some obvious mistakes or just really soft stuff to the books. Just let the bookmakers shape the market. I still like Boston College over. The problem is 6.5 laying $1.80 is a little much for me. Here at the Nugget, you can still get Florida State minus $1.60 at 7.5. 5 Dimes has that at 2.25. So that's a fairly decent difference there. I like Michigan State over 7.5. I think that's moved now. What else did I recently take? Man,
Michigan State's at 7.5.
It was when it came out on May 30th.
I don't think it's still
No, I don't think it is anymore. I'm kind of moved on from the season win total stuff. Like, I hit them early, and if you hear anything, change. But
yeah, I think at this point, just looking at the updated win totals I put out this week, yesterday, the day before, I have a lot of numbers that seem too high. Like an Alabama is very high, but like in Nebraska, Virginia Tech, Texas even, I have more than like a win off from whatever the recent lines were. But then the only ones I've got maybe overachieving are like Oklahoma State. I've got them at 8.4, and the last I saw was 8. So I mean, it seems like maybe there's still some value there, but it's all on one end. Back to the it's easier to pick the overrated than the underrated, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up Oklahoma State with the Drew Brown transfer from Hawaii. Do you think he'll start?
I have not heard the latest. I think we were talking about floors. He helps Oklahoma State's floor at quarterback, but I think the hope for Oklahoma State would be that one of the other guys has a higher ceiling and is able to overtake him a little bit. But I think, with an Oklahoma State, with a Louisville even, we look at the losses and we forget the track record of the coach and the system and everything else, and maybe we overreact a little bit to Bobby Petrino has had like one team win fewer than 8 games. And so he has a track record, even though he just lost who he lost. Maybe we overact to that in terms of especially those initial lines.
Okay. And I guess we can transition into tonight's games, talking about the old Hawaii quarterback, Hawaii, Colorado State. Anybody got any best bet on that game tonight?
Well, I know Ed already made a bet on that game.
No.
No, on New Mexico State. Right. Well, for Colorado State, I think Colorado State's just a lot better. I've seen the line rising really quickly. It started off at like 13 or 14. That was a heck of a deal. But now if it's really getting into like 17 or something.
17 this morning. I think.
Yeah, no, that at some point that stops having value. But I think Colorado State's a lot better. I think one of the things I know Ed and I have disagreed on over the last day is the over/under for that game. It seems like Colorado State lost a ton on offense. Hawaii lost a ton on offense. So the immediate assumption is, that's probably an under situation. But that was a really low point total initially.
Well, it's going up too. So.
And so, maybe that was a little overreaction, and there's value in the over there. But I know that line's moving too.
We also got Wyoming, New Mexico State tonight, guys. Wyoming, they lose their great quarterback, first-round quarterback here, strong arm, Josh Allen, all this. There's no way they could bring in a quarterback and still do well. Anybody like New Mexico State this year?
So Josh Allen led the 128th offense out of 130 teams last year in adjusted yards per play. So I mean, I think in the NFL he's going to make Jake Locker look like Aaron Rodgers. So as far as this game goes, I think Wyoming's offense gets better. I mean, they can't get worse. I mean, they literally can't get. Right. I mean, I guess they could. They could be 129th or 130th, but I don't think they get worse. I think Craig Bohl is a guy I laughed at the first 2 years he was at Wyoming, and when people were like, I really like this guy as a coach. But now it looks like he's really building a defense. He's got a ton of guys back. I was lucky enough to get that at 3.5 yesterday. I still like Wyoming -4 on the road. And another thing I want to bring out about this game, one thing I've been fascinated about this preseason is kind of comparing different parts of the market to each other. So I've been able to take market win totals and back out what spread should be for the first game. New Mexico State's super interesting. They're at 6 wins, but highly shading the under. And when you account for that and their schedule, they're actually 122nd out of 130 teams when you finish that calculation. And that calculation really likes Wyoming. I think that they have Wyoming by 10 on the road. I think that's a little bit too big, but it's an example of something where I'm looking for inconsistencies in different parts of the market, and we can talk about other ones as well. But that's one where the market's really like Wyoming through their win total in this game.
Yeah, I know New Mexico State has by far the easiest strength of schedule in the country, so that's going to help them a lot, even though they're probably going to start 0-2 here.
Well, and they lost Tyler Rogers, the quarterback, who I really liked.
Yeah, Larry Rose the third.
Larry Rose, yeah.
Their defense was not great last year, even though they bring everyone back.
Yeah, I think their defense will improve, but it's just a question of how much, because their offense probably will regress a little bit.
2 plays for over/under win totals that I have not moved much. If you guys still want to get these, I think Virginia over 5 is still worth a shot. I believe 6 is significantly more likely than 4 for them. I think Mendenhall is a good coach. Not going to take them to 9-3 or anything, but I like their chance of making a bowl a lot more than I like their chance of going 4-8. And then also Northwestern under 6. This is one where you also could end up with a push, but again, I believe 5 wins is considerably more likely than 7 wins for Northwestern given their schedule, because they do have to play a lot of the better teams out there. So those two are the ones that really have not moved. Most of the other ones I hit moved a pretty good bit to where now it's, you've lost a lot of value.
All right, guys, and last topic before questions, week 1. I guess we'll consider tonight week 0. Next week, best bets you want to throw out there? Anything that caught your eye?
I mean, I'm going to get killed in Ann Arbor for this, but okay. I like Notre Dame +1 at home.
So do I.
Every single model that I've looked at, from Bill's to mine, I mean, both aspects of mine, whether it's the regression model, whether it's looking at markets. I mean, Notre Dame and Michigan are going to be incredibly close, but the home field swings it in favor of the Fighting Irish. So, I mean, it's not something I love, but I think Notre Dame should be the favorite in that game by ever so small margin. And yeah, I mean, it's a huge game. It's obviously a huge game for both teams. In that game, if you want to kind of gauge Michigan's future this year, just keep watching the left tackle. It's probably a guy named Jawan Bushell-Beatty, terrible at pass blocking last year. If he can just hold his own in this game, Michigan's going to have a pretty good season, even if they don't win this game.
Ed, so if you like Notre Dame in that game and you're down on USC, do you also like Notre Dame at 7-1 to make the playoff?
Let me see. I think I do. So one thing, I have Notre Dame as a favorite in every game this year. That's partially their schedule, partially because my numbers don't necessarily like USC. What were their playoff? It's 7-1. So I have Notre Dame at about 21% to make the playoff.
I would say another game that I was kind of surprised by the line was Ole Miss Texas Tech. First of all, as we were discussing beforehand, I think it's in Houston, so I think people immediately think, okay, well, that's a slight home field advantage for Texas Tech. It's in Texas, but I'm pretty sure Oxford is closer than Lubbock to Houston, or it's very close either way. So that really is kind of a neutral field, no matter what state it's taking place in. But also, my numbers, I don't necessarily agree with this entirely. My numbers really kind of like Ole Miss. They're a team that has that's going to have depth problems, like a West Virginia. So they might be worse in November than they are in September. But in September, they're going to have a really, really good offense. They might have the best receiver in the country in A.J. Brown. Texas Tech's defense is still Texas Tech's defense, even though it was better last year or less bad. And so
they took a remarkable jump. I mean, that was a miracle for that program.
Yeah, to get into the 80s. Yeah, that was.
Well, I think I had him in the 60s for a while.
But yeah, getting to mediocrity was impressive. But Ole Miss's offense is still going to be really good. I have them, I think, projected to win by 6.5. And last time I saw the line, it was 2.5 for Texas Tech. So that's a huge difference. The other one I had a big difference in was Alabama, just because of that defensive back regression and everything. I only have them projected to be really good and not otherworldly. Okay. And so they beat Louisville by 15-18, but not 26 or whatever the line is at.
Interesting.
The one I like is also in that game, actually. Louisville's receivers are actually really good.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to focus on the loss of Lamar Jackson, but Louisville returns a lot of really nice players there in the receiving core. Bobby Petrino almost always finds a way to scheme guys wide open deep, having an opening game with time. Bama runs a very complex defense, right? You talked about defensive back continuity. They run a lot of combo coverages that require defensive backs to work with each other, pass off receivers, convert zone to man. If I'm Bama, the team I don't want to play in week 1 is probably a Bobby Petrino offense with a bunch of returning receivers. I think right now it's at 58. I'm pretty confident there'll be 60+ in that game, because I do think Louisville can get to 20.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated by that game too, because when you take market win totals and back out spreads for week 1, they usually tend to overestimate these big spread games. It's still only at 18. So either you believe that 25 is a fair line in this game, and then you should probably think about going under for Louisville's win total because you don't think they're necessarily that good, or you got to think about Louisville on the side. And I'll probably throw up first before I bet against Nick Saban. In game 1, which I don't necessarily like to do, but I mean these guys are certainly supporting that 25 is too high.
All right, guys. Anything in conclusion before we open it up to questions here? All good. Sophie, anybody have any questions? Got one here.
Hey there. I was just wondering, how exactly are you making models that are up to date, that are not at least 4 games into the season? You know what I mean? How could you explain? Just forgive my ignorance. Could you explain how you're building these models that you're talking about without there being like an actual sample size?
Yeah, I mean, so in the preseason, you know, both Bill and I use multiple years of past history to project week 1. And those tend to, you know, those are a big part of what happens early in the season. By week 3, week 4, we start adding data in from the current season. I'm pretty sure that's what you do as well, Bill, and that kind of builds that forward. Does that answer your question, or was there something a little deeper that we're missing?
Like just talking like solid, hard analytics, like net yards and all of that. Like, are how much are you weighing the preseason in both leagues, like in college and in NFL? How much are you weighing that into your models?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, there's some preseason weight all year in my model, and I found that to be the most predictive. And I know that seems insane. You know, that at a bowl game, you're still thinking about how we rated these teams right now, but it's just a really small sample size of 12, 13 games in college football, 16 games in the NFL. You know, and it's kind of why, you know, in some sense, like, I didn't really give credit to Penn State and Washington after the 2016 season. It was their first year, they're taking a leap. You kind of need to see them do it again. And now that they've done it over 20-ish games, you know, you tend to give them a little more credit. So that's kind of the idea behind why there's still a little bit of, you know, weight the entire season. I mean, obviously, you add new numbers, and that's the most important part of what goes into a bowl projection. But you're still keeping in what happens during the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, basically my system, for the preseason projections, there are 3 components. Number 1 is that recent history aspect, and you do stretch it out. Last year has the heaviest weight, but you stretch it out further because, again, a team can drastically overachieve in a 12-game sample. Can inaccurately, their record can be very inaccurate compared to what maybe they should have been or would have been over a longer period of time. So yeah, you take that 5-year history. The other 2 pieces of mine are that returning production piece. That's probably the biggest piece, is taking that and just applying it to last year's and kind of moving up and down based on those percentage returning. And then I do take a recruiting, I think like 20% of the model or something like that is recruiting from the last 2 years, not 5, because at some point, you know, your recruiting, you are what you are. It's you know what your recruiting rankings were 5 years ago doesn't necessarily matter. But taking 2 year, I can at least, you know, when you combine that with the returning production, you can look at, you know, how much are they losing and then what quality are they replacing it with. And so that balance seems to have worked out the best for me overall. And like Ed's, it seems very counterintuitive, but the longer you keep those projections in, even just like a little bit, you know, the better your model does. And I do think that speaks to how college football works and how little teams change or whatever, but it works.
And you can use this to your advantage, right? I think if you look at our comment section or your comments that you get back on Twitter, it's week 5 and Bill's rankings are not at all matching up with the current standings. And you see all these fans who might represent the general public in terms of wagering. Bill, are you crazy? Well, look at this. This team's undefeated. You got this team with 3 losses, still rated higher than them. You can use that to exploit some value here.
Yeah, I hear ain't played nobody a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one time Alabama has been an underdog in the markets was after Georgia started the season hot. I don't forget how many years ago. I think when
2015, I think.
Yeah, was Ramsey the quarterback, and they got off to a great four-game start. Alabama goes into Georgia, they're like a 1-point underdog.
Win by like 30 or something.
Yeah.
In a blackout. Yeah.
So just the small sample size, you gotta definitely have to consider that. We as human beings are very bad at trying to understand randomness. We'd rather tell a story about what we see on the field than to just say, oh, that was a small sample size, let's get on with life. But that's,
yeah,
but you gotta try.
No matter how much we know better, we so drastically overreact to week 1. And we do it every single year. We'll always do it.
Well, I mean, hopefully that means there's value week 2. So.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Another question from the audience here.
I'm going to get up there as fast as I can.
Thank you. That was a great talk. I want to kind of ask a little bit of a follow-up question. One, how do you capture uncertainty or variability when you model, especially early in the season? It feels like, and I'm not sure if this is fair, I'm not a huge college football guy, but is it fair that there was more turnover in the coaching this year among the Power 5 conferences? I mean, I look at the Big 12, there's like, what, 5 or 6 new coaches, the Pac-12. Are there certain teams where the variability or uncertainty is so great that there's just not a ton of value betting on them and you just sort of stay away from those sort of teams?
Yeah, coaching changes are weird. I mean, they really do impact a lot. I will say, in terms of that variability, the biggest thing I've found, and we talked about this on Ed's podcast a couple of weeks ago, the efficiency versus explosiveness balance. The biggest thing I use in my numbers is success rate. I took the idea from Aaron Schatz on the pro side of Football Outsiders. It's basically an on-base percentage for football, where you look at every play down and distance. If you get 50% of yards on first down, it's a success. 70% on second down, 100% on third or fourth. Just looking at the game in terms of ones and zeros, was it a success or not, homes in very quickly on what you can actually control. Big plays are going to skew averages drastically, especially at the beginning of the year. Like 180-yard gain, it's gonna make you seem like an explosive team for 3 or 4 games, really. But really looking at that efficiency number first tells you what teams are most in control of and what's most likely to continue moving forward. So I think really focusing on that has helped me a lot, both in terms of the writing side and then in terms of the projection side as well.
Yeah, so go home and Google Bill Connelly three-point shooting, which I know is a little bit weird, but that's what he called the title, because essentially explosive plays are like three-point shooting in basketball.
Right.
Randomness plays a huge effect. I think it's one of the most important things that we've seen in sports analytics over the last 5 years. And I've been using yards per play a lot in both NFL and college football. I'm going to be transitioning over this year to success rate, because I believe that we're going to see that it persists more from early to late season. And it's gonna. I don't feel like I'm gonna get rid of the yards per play, but success rate is gonna become a way more important part of what I do on my site.
Yeah, no, it is. Even if you're explosive, you don't know when those explosive plays are gonna come. That means like an explosive team is gonna have a 20-yard gain or a 15 or 20-yard gain, 15% of the time versus 10% of the time, or something like that. And so, even if you're really good at it, you can't count on them. And those teams that are very reliant, the Stanfords, like with Bryce Love last year.
You gotta hate on Bryce Love.
No, I love Bryce Love. It's just I kind of hated the rest of Stanford. No, when you're reliant on the big plays, you just don't know when they're going to come, and you're going to have some duds, even if you also have some really prolific games.
Yeah, and the same thing applies on defense. Michigan gave up a ton of big plays on that defense, despite I think they had the best.
Yeah, they were the best in success rate.
In success rate, one of the worst in giving up big plays. So you expect that to come back to earth, especially for a unit that's pretty talented.
Do we have time for one more?
Maybe one more.
Okay, one more.
Hi, I would like to know if you do any work with, obviously you work with FBS, but do you do any work with FCS, the lower Division 1, and how do you tackle when a team passes from the FCS to the FBS?
For me, I know. So first of all, for the FCS games, for the FBS versus FCS games, I'm always saying that you can derive value from any game, not just the big ones. But it's really hard. First of all, if I had play-by-play for FCS, I would absolutely do FCS. But the way I have to do it is use the rankings that exist, the Massey stuff, the Sagarin stuff, and basically kind of break teams into tiers. The really, really elite teams in the top tier, the really horrid would absolutely go 0-12 every time, in FBS teams at the bottom, and then kind of tiers in between. That at least allows me to get a general sense for the expectation, setting a baseline. As far as when a team moves from FCS to FBS, I basically do it the same way. Kind of treat like Liberty, I think was like a tier 4-ish team last year. And so the general team, tier 4 team would have been about 120th or something like that. And you start there, and then you apply returning production, all that. I think that's the best you can do. Until we get rolling with an FCS play-by-play system that we can purchase or whatever, that's, I think, the best we can do with it.
Just get Marty to scrape it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that too. I'm good. Anybody wants to do that, let me know.
So in what I do, like when I make strength of schedule adjustments, it includes the entire set of FCS games, because like I need a network of games that needs to be connected to each other. And in order to get those early season, whenever a big team plays a scrub, you know, if you throw out that data, you might be missing out on something. So, you know, I get the data from all the FCS teams. And I've posted on my site like just the pure rankings for the FCS teams. If it's not up for some reason, just email me and I'll post it.
Yeah, there's definite value to be found in being able to differentiate between North Dakota State and you know, Presbyterian or something. We do kind of lump all FCS teams into the same bucket sometimes, and that's a big mistake because there's as big a range of quality in FCS as there is in FBS.
The other thing I'd say about FCS is if you understand that the quality of recruiting an FCS team gets, right, their scholarship players are probably just as good as the bottom 20 in FBS. Yeah. They just simply have fewer of them. But there are certain times when a player from an FBS program gets dismissed for, you know, either academics or behavior, and in certain cases that kid is way better talent-wise than anything that program could ever hope to sign, and they're usually immediately eligible at the FCS level. So occasionally you have this thing where it's like, you know, LeBron James going to play at a pickup game in Rucker Park, and it's like, okay, well, you really didn't take this into account. Like when was it Perilou who went to Jacksonville State?
Right.
Or Crowell, the Georgia running back, who's now with the Browns. You know, if you follow recruiting and you see, wait, that kid was a high 4-star, and he was actually, it wasn't like he was not any good for them. They just had to boot him for drug tests or whatever. Pay attention to that.
Also, to piggyback off of that, just from a betting angle, betting FCS is usually minus 120 compared to, you know, Division I at minus 110, so you got to find more value. Great question though, because Liberty is making the jump this year from FCS to FBS. Does anybody, as we shut this down, we got to go find value in betting Liberty over their season win total, or look maybe to fade them?
I don't remember what their win total was. They're another team that obviously has a very, very easy schedule, so that's going to help. But no, if you can, there is value in just whatever the sources exist, like Sagarin and whatnot, that, you know, that are out there, or I should be using Ed's system instead, actually. You know, if you can create that baseline pretty well, I think you can get a quicker read on a team.
All right, great stuff, guys. Ed, Bill, Bud, thank you. I guess on to the next one, NFL panel. Thanks, Ed.
Can we get water? Can someone grab
Check, check.
water?
1, 2. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
You know, we played when I was with the Broncos. We played
All
in
right.
Barcelona, and with the time change and what we had to do and the
travel
flights
and everything?
else,
She's gonna
oh Jesus!
It wipes you out.
I mean, everybody was dead.
All right, guys, I think we're ready.
It took 2 or 3
All right,
days.
check.
to get
1,
over
2.
it.
Just
Check,
to
check.
get your sea legs back, huh?
Yeah.
All right, we'd like to welcome everyone to our next session here, the International Football Betting Conference, the Vegas Bash, powered by Sportsbook Review. I am TC Martin, Fox Sports Radio here in Las Vegas. Do Monday through Friday show 3 o'clock on 98.9 FM. We have a very distinguished panel here today, and I'd like to introduce our veteran and 2 of the very best handicappers and most accomplished handicappers in the business. First, I'd like to introduce Marc Lawrence, over 30 years as an elite handicapper, publisher of The Playbook, the Preview Guide magazine, of course, his weekly Playbook newsletter. Please give a round of applause to Mr. Marc Lawrence. And then, gentleman to my left, sitting next to Marc, 20 years plus as a successful handicapper. Of course, you can follow him on covers.com. He's a host of SBR's SportsBIT program. And of course, he's always on our Lotus programming as well, too. Ted Cervansky, a.k.a. Teddy Covers, or as I like to call him, Teddy KGB, if you know that reference. Sure. You got that Rounders reference, right? Very nice. And a very good friend of mine, glad to have him here, former Super Bowl coach, 7 years with the New York Football Giants, been coaching football at the collegiate level and the pro level for a good 30-plus years. Please welcome the Coach of the Year back in the NFL 1997, Jim Fassel. All right, guys, today we're going to talk about approaching the NFL from a strategic point of view. And obviously, with NFL coaching and with Jim being here today, I know I want to kind of pick his brain on some of this stuff, even though Jim might not be the biggest sports bettor, sports gambler, but appearing on my show, we throw in some stuff all the time. We have him do some best bets and all that kind of stuff. So first of all, let me ask you guys, we'll start with you, Marc. How much stock do you guys put into a head coach when it comes to handicapping these games?
I weigh it very heavily. In fact, it's one of the styles that I use handicapping. Everybody has their own niches and does their own different thing, but I feel personally handicapping the coaches and their tendencies and their personalities and what they do with teams and what they get out of teams is as important as any ingredient that I do. Coaches and quarterbacks are right there at the top.
Well, I probably am not as strong on coaches as Marc is, with several caveats. Number one is there are definitely situations where a new coach comes in and you say, this is a coach I want to be aware of, I want to be betting on this guy far more often than betting against him. We saw Pete Carroll come into the league and have initial ATS success. We've seen Mike Zimmer come into the league and have initial ATS success. So you can find and fixate on head coaches fairly early in their tenures, and the good ones can make you money. But in any given game, in any given week, one of the things that I do agree with Marc very much about is that you're going to find roles that you like to support coaches in. Certain coaches are good over bets as big favorites. Certain coaches will take the air out of the ball as big favorites. Certain coaches, you want them off a loss. Certain coaches, there are definite coaching tendencies in that regard. But for any given week, if you're going to say, here's the coaching matchup, Coach A versus Coach B, I'm not making a bet because I like Coach A or I don't like Coach B.
Yeah,
it's
all
gotta be a piece of
situational.
the equation.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Jim, so much is made with that coach-quarterback relationship. But I know from a handicapping perspective, too, the things we look at, obviously, is the quarterback position, the most important position on the football field. Talk a little bit about that relationship that a coach needs to have, a head coach, along with his quarterback.
Well, it's you have to have that, and I've had quarterbacks, and I've been fortunate to have great quarterbacks. I recruited John Elway out of high school, coached him the whole time at Stanford, and then went back to Denver Broncos. And to give you an example, when I went back there, John said that he met me when I got off the plane, and he said, "Coach, have you watched film on me?" And I said, "Yes, plenty." And he said, "What do you think?" I said, you take way too many risks. You know, you don't need to take all those risks, man." And I said, "You're the most talented quarterback. I'm gonna put our offense the things you can do well, okay? And then when I went on, we did coaching, and I took him right back to the basics. You know, I said, John, every time you drop back, it looks different, you know? So I got him there, and then I remember telling him, and I talked to him a lot, about you don't have to carry this team. All you got to do is, if you do your great job, it'll be good. And that season that we started with, after the preseason, we played the Jets in New York. And we went out for warm-ups and all that. And I said, John, come here. Took him out to another room. And I said, John, you don't have to win this game by yourself. Sometimes your best throw is in the guy in the third row, all right? You don't have to try to put it, every play doesn't have to work, okay? You just got to get us out of those ones. And that's the mentality I had when I coached Phil Simms and Kerry Collins and Jeff Hofstadler and Boomer Esiason and all these guys. You don't have to win the game yourself. If it's a bad play, give it to the guy in the third row, we'll live another down. Because those talented quarterbacks, you know, they could take a lot of risks, you know, and
especially when they can scramble, right?
What's that?
Especially when they can scramble like Elway could.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In regards to coaches and situations, as we were talking about here, I had to run I have a database, and that's primarily what I work out and what I really, really weigh heavily on. So in my database, I had to make a database of Coach Fassel to see what Coach Fassel did in his career in the National Football League. These are numbers that you probably don't know.
Yeah, you probably don't.
Oh, no.
You're not supposed to know, you know.
But in his career in the National Football League as a head coach, he was outstanding as a division underdog. 21 times he was in that role. He beat the spread 14 times. As a home underdog, he never lost a game or to the spread. 4 times you were a home underdog, you won every game straight up.
Really?
So when Philadelphia visits the Giants in October, you better be on the sidelines this week or for that game, okay? Another role that he was particularly outstanding in is whenever he played undefeated opponents that come in with spotless records, he took them down. 8 times, he beat them 5 times, and he beat the spread 7 of those 8 times. So great job, Coach.
I knew I liked UC back in those days when I was betting.
I didn't know that, man. That's amazing you keep that stat.
There you go.
Really?
Yes.
And that's
well, which brings to a pretty interesting question here, Jim. How aware are coaches and players in that locker room of what the point spreads are? Because we all know we've been in those locker rooms, and there's a big sign there that says, you know, gambling is strictly prohibited and this and that. But obviously, over the years, things have kind of lightened up a little bit. But talk a little bit about that aspect. Did you know what the point spread was every week before every game, and did you gauge that your players knew, or not at all?
No, never was a topic. Never. There's only one time I remember we were playing, and we've got the game now. We're letting the clock run out. Okay, we're on the 5-yard line going in, and we took a knee 3 times. I got about 50 letters. Why didn't you kick a field goal? Because I didn't even know. Because somebody said, you know, actually the reporters asked me, did you know what the point spread was? I said, no, I don't even look at that stuff. And he said, well, you know, and I got these letters that said, God, if you'd have kicked a field goal right there, we ought to have won my money. No, I'm not going to. I never knew it. It was never discussed at any time with the players. I really never heard the players talk about that. You know, it was a non-topic. It just was. We just got to go out and play the game.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Did you hear about it around the league? Because certainly some coaches around both the NFL and college have used it as a motivational technique. You know, oh, we're underdogs to these guys. Oh, Vegas thinks we're dogs to these guys. Have you ever heard anywhere else around the league that that was going on?
No. I used other
methods
to get my team there. You know, I didn't. Never once did I say, well, we're the underdog. No, I never did it. I mean, I'm coaching the same every week. I do it.
What about now, with legalized sports wagering in effect, you know, soon to be nationwide? What stance do you think the National Football League will take on addressing an issue like this? Because, you know, people are going to be more attuned to taking a knee on 3 successive plays to end the football game. You know, is the coach aware of the point spread? Are the players aware of the point spread? What do you think the NFL's approach is going to be?
Well, I'm sure they're coaches that use that as motivation. We're an underdog. you know, we're a 5-point underdog. I'm sure some of them are. I've never talked to a coach that used that, you know, and I certainly never did. And it's just amazing to me that, you know, I've had some coaches here. I won't mention it, that you know, in driving your team and things like that, you gotta, well, the first thing, I talked to John Elway about this a little bit, but turnover ratio is the #1 thing, without a doubt. Okay.
Yes, anyone that bet the Browns last year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know who was the second worst team? The Broncos.
Yes.
You know, and when you look at it, Dick Vermeil and I talk about it all the time. It's by far, there's nothing even close. If you're turning the ball over and you're losing that thing, you're going to live. Every year I've looked at it, the teams that made the playoffs, there's only 1 or 2 teams have a negative, okay, and get into the playoffs. And my first year at the New York Giants, I went in there and I knew we weren't very good. I mean, Dan Reeves was a good coach, and he got fired, and they were terrible. And so I sat down by myself. All right, what am I going to do? I mean, we're not very fast. We're not very quick. Mike Holmgren, who we were quarterbacks together at SC, we played them. And after the game, he said, "Jim, I think you're doing a good job, man, but you don't have any speed at all." And I go, "Oh, really? I think you just noticed that?" and anyway, so the #1 thing I did with the coaches, everybody, we drove it hard with turnover ratio. And I said, you know, because sometimes coaches, like a DB coach, you know, he's 45 years old, he would never played quarterback or anything, and he's got the DBs going and he's throwing the ball to him. I go, that ain't working, man. You don't have an arm. I played quarterback, and I don't have an arm like the quarterbacks do. So I said, when we do this, practicing for interceptions, okay, they're going to be on the jugs gun, and it's going to fire it at them. And same thing with linebacker, fire it at them. And I said, every day I want protecting the ball, offense protecting it, and defense going and getting it. We were the only team in the NFL that was unanimously picked to be last place. Well, that year I got NFL Coach of the Year. And the reason we did?
Motivation?
No.
No?
We had like a plus 36.
There you go.
On turnovers.
Plus 36?
Something like that.
So was that what you would call a regression to the mean from how bad it was the previous year, and it was going to come back better the next team? You could expect that? Or was it more special teams coaching everybody up, making them aware?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of things that goes into that. I mean, but I made that the #1 thing. Special teams, offense, defense, get the ball, turn it over, get it turned over. And you look at 2 teams that, I mean, like Cleveland last year and the Broncos that shouldn't be there, and they were upside down by, I don't know, 26 or something. And Dick Vermeil was the one that turned me on years and years and years ago, as he said, that's #1. And if you look at the stats, without a doubt, that's what it is. And like my first year, I mean, we were the only team picked unanimously by all the writers, everybody, that we're going to finish last. And we were the first team that went undefeated in the NFC East. And it was all because of our turnovers.
Statistically, there's a newsletter that we put out. It's all stats. And what we do is we rescore football games, kind of like a fielding independent rating for pitchers, how well pitchers are actually pitching without mistakes behind them. Same thing in football. Our rescores in games taking the turnovers out. And you get maybe perhaps arguably a better feel of how the team really is. So the question then becomes is how do you address turnovers? As a handicapper, Teddy, how do you address those turnovers?
Well, the concept is you're looking for something predictive, not reactive. You know, the year you're plus 36 in turnovers. You see early on, this is a type of team that's not taking stupid chances with the football, and this is a defense that's going crazy, creating takeaways, playing very aggressively. Look, last year, like the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that you could see early on the negative turnover differential from the previous year wasn't going to carry over until 2017. And when you find those teams that are morphing in that regard, you talk about regression to the mean, you know, teams that had a particularly negative time with turnovers in the one season, and now there's a different emphasis the following season, both on giveaways and takeaways. Those are the type of teams I'm looking for. Those are the type of teams we're trying to make money with.
You know, Marc brought up the stats when Jim Fassel was coaching as far as record. Guys, touch upon who's got like the best ATS records in their coaching careers when we look at these modern day head coaches now.
Yeah, Marc's got his
Well, I just happen to have, because...
Of course you do.
Hey, while you're looking it up, let me correct myself.
Sure.
I don't know if it was 36 plus or 26 plus.
26 sounds good.
I think 26 was it. Yeah, I said 36.
36 sounds better. That's okay.
Whatever.
36 is a heck of a number.
Oh, I know it.
But 26 is, but it's still, I mean, at a plus 26, you're supposed to make the playoffs.
Well, the other thing is, and I'll let him talk now, but if you're looking at it and you're trying to figure out who's going to be good, you got to watch the first 2 to 3 games, okay? And it'll shine that these teams are protecting the football and they're causing turnovers, and it'll continue. It's not like all of a sudden they woke up, you know, that they're -5 and now all of a sudden, no. If they're in the negative or they're in the positive, I'm going to go with that team in the positive.
Sure, and even when you have, let's say, a Belichick-Brady combination, which is, you know, the gold standard for coach quarterback in the NFL, I haven't seen many years where New England's -18 or -11 even. But they're not crazy positive territory every year. You know, there are some years where you see the Patriots with the +18, and there are other years you see them with the -2 and the -4 and the +5. So it's not, even with the elite QBs, the turnover differential year to year, the turnover margin, there's a fair bit of variance, and it's something that bettors can really take advantage of.
You know, speaking of that and tying that into coaches, I'll run by some coaches that had the outstanding records in the league. Andy Reid being one of them. I'll get to him in a moment here. But Mike Zimmer, head and shoulders above everybody else to the spread, the best coach in the National Football League. In his career, 44, 21, and 2 to the spread in every game he's played. That's outstanding. I'm sure he's not even aware of it, and he kills non-division teams. He's beat the spread 32 out of 42 games in non-division games, Mike Zimmer.
And can I just jump in? Sure. Just very quickly, and Zimmer was a specific example that I used earlier, talking about how when the coach first comes into the league, you find this guy and you can ride him. Right. You end up with 44, 21, and 2. You know, Pete Carroll was comparable, but you say, what's Mike Zimmer going to do over the next 4 years, like he's done over the last 4 years?
Will we see that 44, 21? Probably not. Okay.
Exactly.
But it also tells me, right? But I also don't want to be stepping in front of him until I see that decline.
Absolutely.
You know, until going that way. Andy Reid, I mentioned, and Andy Reid is a little bit of an anomaly because, as good as his spread record is, his football teams win games what I call inside out in phony fashion. He consistently gets out-yarded in football games, but they still find ways to win games. Now, can you attribute that to special teams play? Or is it the head coach that overcomes all these turnovers and yet still finds a way to win games?
That's a very good question. And I've known Andy Reid, and I respect him a lot. And I think that, you know, Andy is a veteran coach. He knows how to get his team ready and what he has to do, you know, because when I was down in Florida looking at some players, Bobby Bowden said, "Hey, Jim, can I talk to you for a little while? Just share some thoughts?" I said, yeah. And we went back and forth in exchanges, and he said, you know, the problem with guys that just got into the head coaching business, you know, they can't get out of the room of strategy. They got to draw every play and do all this. No, he says, that's what the assistants are for. And we talked about it, and I listened to him because I was doing it, but then I did more, is that after you get the game plan done and everything's all set, he said, I'd go in my office for at least an hour. I wasn't thinking about plays or anything like that. I was thinking about, what do I have to do to get this team mentally ready to go this week? And because if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. The offensive line coach isn't going to do it, or the linebacker coach isn't going to do it. And he said, you know, to me, that's something that's very important. And I said, you know, I do that, but I never thought about it that way. That you got to be ready to, and you know, I've had guys on my team, the father died, you know, and stuff like that. And I gotta be sensitive to that, spend some time that way. And you just have to as a head coach, and some guys can't make the transition. They just can't leave the room with drawn plays. And then where's the motivation here? Where's the strategy of what am I saying to the team this week to get them jacked up and ready to go?
Well, for whatever reason, Andy Reid has been spectacular away from home in his football games, at least to the point spread, okay? 91 and 56 to the spread in all road games. That's pretty strong.
Wow.
So he finds a way to get his teams motivated to play away from home. Mike McCarthy, the Green Bay Packers, terrific coach in division games. It goes hand in hand with the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. They make division play priority number one, and I would guess, Coach, it may be because you recognize the fact that a division game is worth twice as much as a non-division game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the success that Green Bay's met with Mike McCarthy, Aaron Rodgers has been really, really strong in division games.
Yeah.
And you talk about Andy Reid as a guy who, again, 91 and 56, every away game ever. You know, that's a significant sample size and a very profitable trend. And yet, when you talk to people, Andy Reid, oh, that guy can't win the playoffs. Oh, Andy Reid, you know. That's fine. Bet against Andy Reid in January. But you can bet on him in September, October, November, and December. And there's plenty of coaches like that. The guys that don't have that, that's a beautiful looking ring.
Yeah, it is a nice one.
But the guys
I didn't wear it for a long time, and my son said, who's coaches with the Rams, he said, Dad, why don't you wear your ring? I got a few rings, but yeah, I think I'll start wearing it.
You're in Vegas.
It's blinding. It's great.
Yeah. Well, you know, talking about Andy Reid, because I've known him since he was coaching at BYU in New York. We'd won the division. We're going to get the playoffs. We got to bye the first week and all that. And Philadelphia is coming to New York in the playoffs. And at that time, we were 8-0 against them. For 4 years, we beat them twice. And they had a good team. Man, I told my staff, I said, guys, listen, we've got the highway to the Super Bowl. And these guys are coming in. Now, they're going to be jacked up, and they're a lot better team. Andy's a good coach. And I said, this is the most pressure game I've ever coached in. That if we lose in New York, when we got the #1 seed, the New Yorkers are going to kill me. And it was a hell of a game. We beat them, but it was a tight one.
So, guys, where do you value coaching strategy, the X's and O's, versus handicapping just trends and numbers and that sort of thing? Where's the ratio and how much do you factor in? Because we know there are guys that are really into the X's and O's, not so much trends. Then there are strictly trend guys, analytics guys. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm always looking for, because the head coaches get all the pub and all the hype, but the reality, as you said just a few moments ago, Jim, is that most of the coaching is done by the assistants, and the coordinators are putting together the game plans when it comes to the actual X's and O's. And when you can find connections, you can find, all right, hey, guess what? You know, here's the new defensive coordinator who works against the option, you know, or whatever system it was, it's somewhere else. You can find these little, fairly hidden coaching edges. Those to me are the, you know, that's the nuts. That's what you want. But on a week-to-week basis, the coaching edges aren't always there, and they're a piece of the puzzle, but they're not something that you're going to say, I'm making a bet just because of this.
I'm doing it largely situationally and a little bit more toward what I was speaking about here. There are some coaches that really, really rise to occasions in big games. I mentioned how good you were against undefeated teams. Obviously, Bill Belichick, that kind of a coach. The better the opponent, you know, I don't know if it's the more he works, the harder he strategizes, but the results prove themselves to be. Other coaches can't seem to handle roles, can't step up. They can beat teams that are at lower levels and they struggle against good football teams. And I also like to break them down into the beginning of the season, how they perform early on, and the end of the season, how they come down the stretch. And just an interesting note I'll run by everybody here is John Gruden, now the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. And looking at John Gruden and breaking him down, in his career, John Gruden has really struggled. His teams have, both the Oakland and the Tampa teams that he's had in the month of December. And I don't know, Coach, is that because the teams play hard, he beats them up, they wear down, whatever it is, but when he plays in the month of December, 19 wins, 29 losses, almost identical to the point spread. So his teams kind of get beat up a little bit down the stretch.
Well, you know, and that I can't answer that, but the facts are the facts.
Right.
You know, and you got to look at it. Are you wearing your team out? You know, and do I have a young team? Do I have an old team? Do I have this, that? And you got to back off them sometimes. And I think there's a lot of what you're saying. Sometimes you drive them and drive them and drive them and no let up or let them have some fun. Yeah, you can wear your team out,
right?
And they wear them out physically, mentally, and everything else. So the smart coaches, you know, hey, take a break once in a while. Take a break once in a while.
Let me ask you guys, when you're looking at a rookie head coach or coaches with new teams, you talk about John Gruden, here's a guy, obviously a veteran head coach, been away from the game for 10 years, but you know, rookie head coaches, younger head coaches, still might not be acclimated, you know, with their personnel and stuff. Do you look to fade those guys early on, or what's your handicapping prowess when it comes to that?
Rookie head coaches are a little bit more difficult getting a handle on because you don't know what situation they're inheriting, what type of a team they're inheriting, what kind of problems that team has. So again, it's all in my database, and it's looking at results and seeing what tendencies end up having to be. But I do keep a database on new head coaches to find out overall what head coaches as a league do overall, maybe more specifically than an individual coach. So I can look at situations where I find that new head coaches off back-to-back straight up underdog wins struggle in the next game. Situations like that.
Right.
That's sort of what I do.
And I mean, a lot of times I struggle to put these into generalities. Like we look for this, we tend to look for this. On a new head coach, I mean, it's absolutely a case-by-case basis. And you know, in handicapping, in trying to predict final scores of football games, people are trying often to, you know, find a simple solution, find a quick way. Oh, if I can just bet against all the new head coaches. It doesn't work that way, you know. I mean, the real edges get uncovered by digging. And when you put the time in, you will inevitably find some positive expectation wagers to get your money. Whether those wagers win or not is another question. There's certainly turnovers are going to be a big piece of that equation. But you can put yourself in positions to win with information. And when you're talking about, well, here's the coaches, as a general rule, do we want to be betting on them or against them? I don't have a general rule for that, and I don't think using a general rule for that will help you in any way in trying to predict football winners.
So Jim, how long does it take you to get acclimated with a new personnel? If you just take over a team like that in your first year with the Giants, how long before you really get a chance to know your guys? Is it training camp? Is it maybe first few weeks of the season, or maybe it takes you half of the season?
Well, I think there's a couple things that you do. First of all, I watched a lot of tape on the previous season, right. And I want to make my own opinion of, you know, can this guy do that, or can I do this? Can I do that? And you got to go in there. And George Young hired me, and he was awesome. And they had a thing that was, if you're a tight end, if you're going to be a first rounder or something, guy's got to be 6'5", and he's got to be 240 and run a 4.9 40. And so I studied all this, and I went to George, and I went, George, the game's not that anymore. And I had stats. I said, the teams that are winning the Super Bowls, they got a tight end that is fast and quick. And, well, I did it when I went to the Broncos as offensive coordinator. Shannon Sharp was just a guy. He's just a guy. And I watched tape on them, and I go, oh, wait a minute. The biggest mismatch in the game is a fast, quick, tight end against a linebacker. Mm-hmm. You know, you see it now in today's game.
Gronkowski's.
Yeah, right. And so, you know, you got to go in, and a new head coach has got to do a lot more than just put his plays in. You know, he's got to look at all kinds of different things. What do I need? I need to build this team of what I want to do. And sometimes guys, they don't get it. They don't get it. I mean, what kind of offense? And to me, I've always done it. I want a tight end, and you see it today in games, right? The teams.
Sure.
They got a great tight end that can run and run away from a linebacker, and they're too big for DBs and all that. And that's where the game has come. But, you know, as a head coach, you got to come in there and just say, no, this is my system, you know, and that's it. You got to go in there and you got to start with the foundation. And then hopefully you can work with the general manager in that to get the players you want to get.
So how long does it take? I mean, do you feel comfortable early in the season, or does it take, you know, even year 2 or year 3 before you start to say, all right, this is my team now?
No, I think that as a coach, you have to adjust yourself, okay?
For the first year?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to change the whole team. You know, you try to get some draft and some free agents and stuff, but maybe you can't. So, you know, I worked around it when I first went to the Giants. I couldn't get another tight end. You know, Howard Cross was our guy. And he was a big physical guy, but he wasn't fast or anything else, so I had to adjust my system. You know, you have to adjust your system for what you got. And then over the time, you know, then I finally got Jeremy Shockey. Okay?
He worked out all right.
Yeah, he worked out all right. Yeah.
Hey, Coach, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I got to talk about the elephant in the room, okay? And that's not only are they a hard knocks team this year, and they're getting a lot of publicity, a lot of play. They've gone from San Francisco was the Kool-Aid team at the end of the season last year that everybody wanted to get on and bet. Now it's the Cleveland Browns for reasons I don't quite understand. But the bottom line is Hugh Jackson, their head coach, has really obviously been controversial. He's won 1 game. He's been there. He's lost 34 games in a row on Sundays. Sundays is not a good day for Hugh Jackson. What's your take on the situation with Hugh Jackson in Cleveland? Will he be there if they don't win, or will they make a coaching change early before the season ends?
With Hugh Jackson?
Yes.
Will they keep him or whatever?
Yeah, if they're not winning early out.
It's always hard to make a change with a head coach during the season, okay? But Hugh Jackson, something's missing there. And I don't like to run anybody down because he was at Oakland Raiders and they failed.
Yes.
And I've never heard of a guy win 1 game in 2 years and he still's got the job. I mean, that's kind of scary. You know? Hell, sign me up for that job. But, you know, and I don't know. I never don't want to beat up a coach. And I know Hugh Jackson. I interviewed him one time for a quarterback job, and I didn't hire him. But I don't know. But something's missing there. I mean, really.
So does he go to Baker Mayfield out of need or necessity because he senses his job may be on the line? If Baker Mayfield might be that answer. And also when the Cleveland Browns drafted him, they did a real thorough job in their evaluation, in their analytics evaluation. They're doing a thing now called AQI instead of the Wonderlic tests that they were running. So the new thing is it's the modernized Wonderlic. It's called the AQI, Athletic Quotient Intelligence. And amazingly, Baker Mayfield scored the highest of any quarterback ever.
Really?
Yes, and that's just the ability of his intelligence to be able to adapt to situations like reading defenses, blitzes, what to do, and so forth and whatnot. So because knowing that was the reason behind Cleveland drafting Baker Mayfield and his precision passing, do you think he'll use Baker Mayfield earlier than he should?
That's a very good question, and I don't know if I got a good answer for it because I haven't studied him a lot. And, you know, if you got a rookie quarterback, okay, if you got a rookie, you better be damn sure what you think he can do and what he could handle. You know, you can't just throw the whole book at him, you know, and give him a lot of audibles and change the play and do this. It's confusing on that now. I played quarterback. I know. If you get, you know, they throw so much at you that you're not sure because you want that quarterback to drop back and boom, throw it. And, you know, if you give him too much as a rookie, because I guarantee you everybody's going to go after him. They're going to go after him. And
because he was the #1 pick of the draft, or just the fact that he's a rookie?
Rookie.
Okay.
Yeah. I know we're winding down here, and got a couple minutes. We'll throw it out and have you guys ask any questions if you'd like to either Teddy, Mark, or Coach Jim Fassel here. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, Coach, it's an honor. Just being an NFC East coach for so long and winning the division twice, who was your favorite team to play in the division? You always wanted to crush them. The Cowboys, the Redskins, the Eagles.
My favorite team to play in the division? I don't know, probably Washington Redskins. You know, they had changes and stuff like that. And we go back to Andy Reid. I had a lot of respect for him. Although my first 4 years, we beat him 8 straight times. But they got tougher and tougher as he got his thing. I was probably the only one in the Giants locker room that I respected the Cowboys. They were hated, you know, but I liked them. And so probably Washington Redskins, I think.
Anybody else? Yes, sir. Or ma'am.
How much do you look at roster depth in terms of dealing with things like not fading in December? Because I think that the deeper the roster, the less likely it is you're gonna fade dramatically. And do you evaluate the back end of teams' rosters and looking at handicapping?
Well, that's a great question, Slick. As usual, Jay Sullivan, guys. But no, he wasn't planning. It's a legit question. And I mean, honestly, that if you watch preseason football, that's in my opinion, as a handicapper, the only reason to pay any attention to the second half of these games is for that exact question. Okay, does this roster have any depth? Can they withstand some injuries? And how are they playing? In particular, can the offensive line block it? Can the second string offensive line block anyone? Can the second string defensive line create and generate any pressure? Can the second string guys in the secondary make any plays? Again, the second string wideouts make any catches? And that's the type of thing I like to pay attention to in August that can end up paying real dividends in December.
All right, guys, I'm going to have to excuse myself. They wanted me to throw out a reminder. They're going to have a lunch break here, and then the next session will start up again at 1:30. And I guess if you guys would like to continue taking some questions, whether it's here on the dais or up there, I don't know if they need to do anything here.
A little follow-up to what Teddy said about the roster's depth and whatnot. You know, they say the most important position on an NFL team is the quarterback. Mm-hmm. The second most important position is the backup quarterback. And I think it's really important gauging that when you're doing season win totals, especially with quarterbacks like an Andrew Luck, who has been known to be injury prone. So if you're doing that and you're taking a strong stance on a team, make sure that your backup quarterback is somebody that you're going to feel comfortable with behind center.
There's a big difference between Nick Foles as your backup QB, who just won a Super Bowl, and I don't know, Brandon Weeden, or you know.
There you go.
For example.
Exactly.
Another former Cleveland Brown.
How about this? Tom Brady.
Huh? Sure. He was a pretty good backup.
Belichick and I are very good friends. And they would come to New York, and we'd practice, and then we'd play the game. Then we'd go there, practice, play the game. And we were up there. And I looked at that guy. I said, "When'd you get this guy?" You know, Well, you remember he was a backup. He made the team.
In Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, and Drew Bledsoe went down.
Right.
And
he was the
at
backup.
the time, if I'm not mistaken, you correct me. You guys are smarter than I am with that. They were like 1-2 or something.
They were 0-1, and then they lost the second game, and Brady came in. So they were 0-2.
And then they were 0-2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because I talked with Bill, and I talked a lot back and forth, and he says, "I kind of like the guy, you know, but you don't know. Now you got a rookie coming in, play. Oh, you won the Super Bowl with him." And I think a big part of that is Belichick had a good handle on the team, okay? And I think the defense really took over. They really played good that year. And they had Brady just do what he could do. They're not going to hand him the whole playbook. And they won a Super Bowl.
Vinatieri?
Yeah.
You know,
All right, so we've got to wrap things up.
The kicker helped.
Yeah. Round of applause, Marc Lawrence, Ted Cervansky, and the head coach, Jim Fassel. I've got to excuse myself, guys, so if you'd like to continue on.
Thank you, TC.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, Teddy. Cheers. Thank you. I'll talk to you later. Okay.
Okay, I guess. All right.